Greetings, fellow keepers. It's Soniel here again with a new edition of the Keeper's Corner, and we have had a lot of requests from various players on Discord and through the YouTube channel here for suggestions on which heroes to focus as new players and at lower level brackets, things like that. And although we have started the hero feature series, we aren't very far into that yet, so we'll go ahead and have a look at a few of the heroes now that some of you guys are going to want to focus on early on as you unlock them, and of course as you level up to make sure you are prepared for the higher level brackets when you arrive there. The first of which is going to be the Knight. Your starter hero here is the Fighter, and you're going to want to really replace him with the Knight as soon as possible. The premier endgame build, so to speak, for the Knight is typically the perfect katana here for the additional poison resistance and stun resistance that it gives him, as well as the epic Strength of Legend plate mail armor. And the skill setup that I use for him is Parry, Sunder, and Threaten. That is, of course, the premier tanking setup. It gives you both the damage reduction from Parry as well as the armor boost from Threaten and the little bit of armor debuff from Sunder there, and the defense and armor passives there. And secondly, here will be your first healer hero is the Cleric. The Cleric is not only one of our very valuable gold boosting heroes, she has a very strong party resistance buff, which will help both at early level brackets and later on. And this is the build I particularly use with her for healing and gaining a little bit of soul energy, which is the Cleanse, Righteous Call, and Quick Heal. However, at lower levels, you may probably want to use the Powerful Heal in place of the Righteous Call until you get a high damage weapon for her. The Righteous Call does not do quite enough damage to generate enough soul energy to be worth using. The Mystic here is another high value hero at higher tier brackets and higher levels that may not be quite as useful earlier on, but you definitely don't want to neglect either her hero level or her star level. And there are a few different things you can do with her, particularly her dodge boost as well as her cleanse ability are the most important aspects of her as a support and utility hero in PvP and hero battles, as well as this massive cooldown reduction ability she has, and an all resistance buff very similar to the Cleric's. And when we get up into our uncommon heroes here, there are two heroes in particular that you are going to want to focus on. The Monk is one of the most powerful PvP and hero battles heroes, and that strength is very dependent on his star level. That is, of course, because of these percent-based passive boosts here to his attack and defense. The benefit from that, of course, is that he gains more from level ups, from star levels, from gear and enchantments than typically any other hero in the game. So with the increased level cap, he'll benefit more greatly from that than anyone. Five levels at about 8 attack and defense is going to give him about 60 to each main stat, whereas most other heroes, with the exception of the Shaman and the Ranger, are going to only get a 40 and 40 stat boost there. Similarly with the plus 10 enchantment on epic weapons later on, that is an additional 80 and 80 for most heroes. For him, of course, that's going to be around 120 and 120. And as a result, the Monk can max out at about 1500 attack and defense later on. Of course, he's another one like the Mystic that isn't quite as valuable early on, so you don't want to overinvest in him at lower level brackets, but you definitely don't want to ignore his stars or hero level. For PvE and somewhat for towers and a little bit in PvP as well, the Paladin is a very valuable uncommon hero. The setups on him can range here from the Holy Shield block and rebuke to the Holy Shield avenge and rebuke. I typically wouldn't suggest using Holy Smite on him. He is a one-handed hacking and plate mail user. So in lower tiers, you're going to want to go with the Crystal Hammer typically and graduate him to the Moon Mace for the defensive bonus, and eventually to the Ambusher's Hacker for the cooldown reductions and get those Holy Shields and Avenges off a little faster with him. In terms of the other uncommon heroes here, the Berserker has some niche value in PvE, but you're going to be better off ignoring him for the most part. The Witch is another one that doesn't have very much value. The Sorceress and the Pirate here are both boost heroes. The Sorceress boosts training points, the Pirate boosts gold gain. So you want to level them up just a little bit so that they can survive, but you typically don't want to focus on them for any real PvE or PvP value in terms of progressing and things like that. When we get up into our rare heroes here, your primary focus is going to want to be your Druid, who is your secondary healer and one of your better utility heroes, particularly because of her Invigor here. It is a massive cooldown reduction ability that will be very, very useful in both PvE, tower attacks, and hero battles. She's really a linchpin to a lot of successful teams across the board there, as well as one of the most powerful heals, if not the most powerful heal in the game here with Renewal. It is a heal over time spell, so it can be dispelled by the spell sword, but in PvE and towers, again, it's a very, very useful ability. And a enemy slow and decent damage dealer here in Entangle. So once again, the Druid is a very high value hero that you're going to want to focus on as soon as you unlock her. The other high value rares here, of course, are the Barbarian, who has a very, very nice mix of DPS, ranged DPS, and tanking ability. For your DPS setup, you're going to want to use Leaping Strike, Bear's Strength, and Savage Swipe. For your tank setup, you're going to want to switch Savage Swipe out there for the Turtle Shell. And for your tank setup, you'll also want Ward, but typically for your DPS setup, you'll want to run the True Damage and the cooldown reduction. The other thing that is very important when using the Barbarian is her soul skill here, Baleful Glare. It is, I think, the lowest cost soul ability in the game, and it has a very significant defense reduction, which, when used in the correct teams and on the correct enemies, can create a massive defense debuff to allow you to even one-hit kill some more powerful tank heroes and things like that when she's paired with heroes like the Monk or fellow debuffers like the Necromancer. And of course, the premier setup for her will be the Ambusher's Hacker, which is available fairly early at level 37, so you're going to want to pursue that as one of your earlier epic crafts. And at the highest tier brackets, you're going to be using the epic armor here, the Great Wormhide. But the Vest of the Flayer is very, very good for her as well, for DPS output and for the combination of the dodge reduction on both this and the Ambushers. And like I said, she can be very successful at both DPS and tanking in PvE. For PvP, you typically want to focus more on her DPS because of how valuable she is. The third and fourth heroes here that you're going to want to look at are the Samurai and then the Spell Sword, both of which are chain users. Late game, again, you're going to want to focus the epic armors almost exclusively because of the magic resistances they have. And the end game here will also be the epic weapon on him, the Doomblade. However, if we have a look at the tiers for his weapons, there are a few decent options when leveling up. The Nature's Wrath is a decent one at lower levels, as well as the more defensive Greatsword here with the little bit better defensive ability. In terms of these two super rares, I would typically avoid those because of their high craft cost and not very great ability. One of them is a little more defensive, that's the one I have crafted here, than the epic, the Dominator with the dodge reduction and 110 health, but the shadow damage on the Doomblade is very significant, and you don't want to ignore that when using him. And now your typical setup for him can be either the Finishing Strike or the Deadly Cut, but most importantly for him are the Demon Shout, which is a percent-based attack reduction, and the taunt on him, the Warrior's Challenge. Now, because he's a chain user and not a plate mail wearer like the Knight or the Templar, you're typically going to want to use him in your backline as what most keepers refer to as a wing taunt. And he'll be most effective when paired with heroes like the Druid and a powerful frontline DPS like the Monk or the Ranger, where they can take some damage tanking, but not quite as much as a full-blooded tank like the Knight, so he can distract some of those hits and debuffs from them as a wing taunt there. And for his passives, if you are using him as a wing taunt, you'll want to use the all resistance and the defensive buffs here. You'll typically want to avoid his attack buff as the passive skill. And the Amazon here is also a fairly valuable rare hero, but the Spell Sword is, again, one of the more, if not most, valuable utility heroes in the game. And that is, of course, because of his Mass Dispel here. One of the more popular team setups at later brackets is the Monk, the Samurai, the Barbarian, and the Druid. And this Dispel allows you to remove the Monk's buffs, the Samurai's taunts, the Druid's Invigor. There are a lot of different things you can do with this and a lot of different abilities that you can remove with this skill here. So it's very important in later PvP battles to focus on your Spell Sword, and he can also become quite a valuable DPS hero to some extent, and that's typically going to be with his Power Strike, his Haste, and either his Magic Missile or his Spell Strike here, as well as the passive here that will boost his Power Strike damage. You can also boost the Magic Missile damage, but most people will probably prefer to start with the bonus Soul Energy on him. And of course, the endgame build in that regard for DPS will be the Vorpal Sword and the Dragon Scale Armor. However, we will again have a look at the tiers for him. The Sunforged Sword here is the only one-handed slashing weapon that has an element on it. As a result, this is a very valuable early game weapon for most players. Additionally, the Diamond-Edged Sword here can have some decent DPS output and isn't too steep on its crafting cost. But again, typically you're going to want to go for that Vorpal Sword on him and the Epic Chainmail as well, for the reason we talked about with that bonus health and magic resistance. And the Amazon here we'll have a real quick look at. Again, she is a fairly valuable hero. In my opinion, she loses a little bit of value later on compared to some of those other rare heroes. It's just a little more difficult to find a place for her with some of the higher tier and more valuable heroes in different team setups. But she does boast one of the more powerful epic weapons, which is the Frost Spike here, as a very high base damage and an additional element type here. And she does have the one of the few soul skills in the game that typically will always gain you more soul energy than it costs, at least when you're using this epic weapon here. And at 100 casting cost, it does take a little bit to build up to, but again, when you're using the 3 offensive abilities here, which is the typical setup I use for her, you're going to gain a lot of return soul energy when using that Frenzy. You do have to be very careful to use it when her 3 attack skills have already been used by her, because it does reset her skill cooldowns. If you don't use it effectively, you will waste those attacks. And when we get up into our super rare heroes, unfortunately there aren't quite as many options as there are in the rare category, but the Shaman and the Warmaster here are going to be our 2 premier focus heroes. The Shaman is going to have one of the better early game builds than most heroes will, and that is going to be set up here with either the Fist of the Dark One and the Mithril Mail, or the Fist of the Dark One and the Chain Skin. And the Fist of the Dark One is, in my opinion, the best super rare item in the game, probably closely rivaled by the Shell of Protection in the 30 brackets, but because of its damage type, its initiative gain, and its cooldown reduction on a hero like the Shaman that is already very, very quick with his skill cycle and his starting initiative, it allows him to get a lot of attacks off with that bonus damage type for pretty significant damage. And the setup you're going to want to use when doing that is the Wicked Punch, the Earthen Strike, and the Spirit Rage. You're going to want to avoid the Fire Aura. I know the fire damage bonus seems very enticing, however, the cycles on both the Earthen Strike and the Wicked Punch are so fast that having 2 attack abilities as opposed to 1 is going to be much better for you. And you're going to want to go with the attack bonus and the inherent speed, which is his cooldown reduction. And much like the Monk, which we talked about, his passive being a stat-based percentage gain, the Shaman is another hero who benefits very greatly from hero levels, hero stars, and equipment because of this percentage gain to his attack. So you do want to make sure that you emphasize enchantments and things like that on him, and base attack rating as much as possible to get the most out of his attack that you can. And the other priority hero is really going to be the Warmaster here. The Warmaster does not really have any offensive output. You can set him with the Heavy Bash and or the Wrathful Strike. The Wrathful Strike can pull some pretty big critical hits with the right setup, but his support value is much too great to ignore for a DPS build on him, and the reason for that is going to be his Call to Arms, which is a massive skill cooldown reduction, and it is a party-wide buff, as well as the party-wide buff to damage percent Battle Fury here, which is going to allow him, when combined with a number of heroes like the Shaman and Kensei, even the Ninja and a few lower DPS heroes, to really maximize the DPS output on other heroes by increasing their skill cycle, as well as their damage output. And he can also passively increase all resistance and armor by a decent rating. And the other option for him is going to typically be this defensive passive here for himself. His soul skill is a very powerful one, especially when partnered with the Paladin in terms of raising your entire team's survivability. Because the defense bonus on this is percentage based, when you combine it with the Paladin's Holy Shield, you can get some really massive defense gains up into the 5, 6, 7, 800 range. And this is one of the few heroes that some players will suggest avoiding the epic armor for in lieu of the additional cooldown reduction on the chain skin. And the reason for that is because he can wear the Ambusher's Hacker as a one-handed hacking hero, which will further boost that cooldown reduction and allow him to get more of those party buffs off. Because we're not too worried about him dying, he is a more defensive hero, and because he's not giving us anything offensively, if he does die, it's not going to break us completely. Now, the Kensei and the Ninja here are both decent heroes. The Kensei needs a lot to be effective. His own buffs, the Blade Meditation and the Inner Focus, are easily dispelled, so we're typically going to advise avoiding him simply because the investment and the setups for him are too specific and too great to advise to everyone. And because he's a hero that relies on critical hits, it's going to be difficult for everyone to get the same output from him. The Ninja here is somewhat of a utility hero and somewhat of an unsung gem. Because there hasn't been too much testing and usage done for the higher level brackets on the Ninja, I will advise avoiding him for now, but it is worth noting that he got some boosts to his base stats in the 1.6 patch, and he does have a source of true damage as well as a pretty decent setup of physical damage skills here, and a percent damage debuff as well as an AoE stun. So there is some potential here for the Ninja with a high star, high equipment, max level Vorpal sword situation for the Ninja to be a decent DPS hero. But we'll go ahead and get up into our epic heroes here. Of course, your highest value epic hero for hero battles, and in a lot of other regards, is going to be the Blackguard. One of the reasons for that is because the Blackguard can both serve as a tank and a DPS hero, but more specifically because he's one of the few heroes that has 2 bonuses to his DPS without requiring another hero to buff him or another hero to debuff the enemy for him. These 2 abilities here are the Find Weakness and the Deadliness passives, that when you combine the 2 of them with this skill setup here, the Death Glare, the Vicious Strike, and the Double Swing, the Vicious Strike is again another debuff ability that he possesses to himself. So he doesn't really require a lot of support in hero battles to be successful. You can separate him from your debuffers and your buffers and he'll still perform at a high level. So that makes the Blackguard a very valuable hero in that regard. Now the Archmage is not quite as valuable in hero battles at higher brackets because of the magic resistance on all the different epic items. However, for tower attacks and PvE, the Archmage is very possibly the most valuable hero. The Warlock can, of course, supplant him in those regards because she does have the same amount of AoE abilities available to her. However, the Archmage does have access to his double element weapon a few levels earlier than her, and this is what's going to make the Archmage more valuable than most other heroes for those PvE and tower attacks, is this double element Rod of Ruin. That's going to allow his AoE damage abilities to take out whole rooms by himself. And the other benefit he has over the Warlock is his ability to combine the Aetheron robes here with his 2 defensive passives, the Stone Skin and the Displacement, to become what a lot of keepers call the tank mage, and he can handle the front line and PvE and tower attacks in a lot of areas. So you definitely want to make sure you focus on both the Blackguard and the Archmage. Another one here is the Ranger. The Ranger can serve both as a DPS hero as well as a frontline tank. We're going to be doing a hero feature coming soon on the Ranger, so we don't want to get too much in depth with her. The Necromancer is a great debuff hero. He doesn't really have a lot of DPS output, and he does go a little bit ignored in terms of star rating and things like that, because he doesn't need a huge attack output or anything like that to do what you need him to. You're going to rely solely really on his fear ability, which is very similar to the Samurai's Demon Shout, as well as the Ray of Enfeeblement here, which is the strongest single target debuff of any hero. It's going to reduce attack, defense, and damage dealt. So if you are able to enfeeble a hero that they can't cleanse, you're going to get the upper hand most of the time in that regard. And now we do have the Valkyrie now available, which for most newer players isn't going to be a concern just right away unless they're willing to pay the money for her. However, you can purchase her with just gems, so if you do want to pick the Valkyrie up for free, make sure that you're watching those ads every day to get your 90 free gems. Save those gems up for 30 days and you'll have the necessary 2,500 gems to purchase her. And we've yet to get her fully maxed out here, but when we do, we will check her out in some hero battles and make sure to inform you guys on what her best ability setups are and how valuable she can be in different situations. Anyhow, that's a quick look at all of the different heroes and their different abilities that you're going to want to look at as you're leveling up and as you're focusing on different sources for soul stones. You want to keep in mind that your common, your uncommon, and rare heroes are the heroes you want to focus on using this find loot option here. When you pick up a hero from the hero menu, you can click on find loot. It will tell you once every 8 hours where to find a special bonus chance for a soul stone, so you can do that up to 3 times a day. Additionally, in the hero shop, you can pick up those stones whenever you have the gold for them. The lower 3 rarities here are again going to be the ones you want to focus on in this regard, because the others are a little bit higher in gold cost, and you'll want to use your heroic missions and your tower rewards here for your super rare and epic heroes. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the Keeper's Corner so you can get all of our new updates and new videos as they come out. And make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions or any questions, comments, anything you need help with, just feel free to leave it in the comments below. Or you can always contact me and any of the other keepers you'd like to speak with on the Tower Keepers Discord server, which you can reach through www.towerkeepershq.com. There will be a link and directions there to join the Discord server. We thank you very much for watching the Keeper's Corner, and we will catch you guys on the next one.